Good morning, everyone. I'm Bridget Polacci, the CEO of the IIB, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar with the National Association of Minority and Women-Owned Law Firms to examine the current state of diversity and inclusion in the legal profession. NAMWOLF is a network of minority and women-owned law firms that assists its members in developing strategic alliances, coalitions and affiliations with corporations, in-house counsel, and other groups. We look forward to today's discussion about ways to promote diversity in legal services. Leading today's discussion is Joel Stern, CEO of NAMWOLF. Prior to becoming NAMWOLF's CEO in 2014, after years of serving on its board, Joel spent more than 20 years as in-house counsel at a variety of companies, including Accenture, where he acted as chief operating officer for the firm's 420-member legal department and managed all of Accenture's outside counsel relationships. So that experience will be very valuable to hear from him today. Joel will be joined by Suzie Scanlon, managing partner of SRD Legal Group. Suzie is an advocate for legal change and is a pioneer in the virtual practice of law. How prescient. She concentrates in the fields of commercial transaction, licensing in the technology industry, and marketing material review for large corporations and alternative investments. She specializes in legal services management and high volume workflows for financial services companies. Also joining us today is Suzie's SRD colleague, Andrew Hutcher. Andy has a robust corporate and securities law practice. Prior to joining SRD, Andy was a managing director and COO of the legal department at Credit Suisse. Stephanie Webster, IIB's general counsel, and Andy worked together at Credit Suisse, and the rest is history. So special thanks to Stephanie for bringing NAMWOLF and SRD to our members today. Before I turn it over to Joel, a little bit of housekeeping. First, we'll take questions throughout, answer them up at the end, but please submit your questions through the Q&A icon or send an email to info@iib.org. Second, I want to remind everyone that this session is eligible for CLE credit in the category of diversity, inclusion, and elimination of bias. During the session, we will announce one or more 5-digit verification codes for purposes of granting CLE credit. If you would like to receive CLE credit, use the link provided on our registration page to complete the online CLE verification form and the online evaluation. You'll need to include the 5-digit verification code when completing the form. The presentations that we'll go through today and other materials are also available on the registration page. And with that, thank you again, Joel, Suzie, and Andy. Joel, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Bridget, and what a privilege to be here today to talk about a subject that I hope you see the passion resonate throughout. And thank you, Stephanie. Stephanie, you have the toughest job of everyone here. You have to read my mind and turn my slides, but I will give you a hint. I'll say turn once in a while. I've given this presentation several times. I love to give it in person because I love to gauge the audience, and I also love to get the exercise of walking up and down the aisle, but can't do that, so we'll do our best. I will also tell you that this topic seems to be very, very hot. I've probably given this presentation 70 or 80 times, probably 40 times since May of this year, and that is not a coincidence. I feel like Lin-Manuel and Hamilton without the talent. I always tell people in my entire life of practicing law, I never ever gave the same presentation more than 3 times, and with this presentation, we've broken the barrier. We're going to talk about diversity and inclusion in the legal profession, and Stephanie, let's go to the next slide. This is a fun slide. When I very first gave the CLE probably 3 or 4 years ago to CBS Showtime, and Gwen Marcus was the GC at Showtime at the time, and I'll never forget, she said, you know, Joel, if you put some numbers in these slides and have some real wordy narratives, you'll get CLE accreditation, because prior to that I didn't do that, and I did that. But I also had this slide, which has changed now 3 times in the last 12 months. In December, this slide was titled Diversity Fatigue, Don't Let It Happen. And the reason it was titled Diversity Fatigue is because as I was going around talking to law firms and in-house counsel, not only about NAMWOLF, but D&I more generally in our legal profession, I was sensing explicitly, many occasions, sometimes more subtly, that people were tired of the topic. And the interesting thing about the tired aspect of it, it was both with the white male and minorities. And my goal was to make sure that nobody allowed diversity fatigue to be an excuse for not doing more. I am not a marathon runner. I've never run more than a 5K. But I understand when you hit mile 19 and you're a marathon runner, you get fatigued. But when you get fatigued, you don't stop running. You figure out what you need to do to finish the race. I do play tennis, and I am competitive. And when I'm tired playing tennis in a match, I don't quit when I'm fatigued. I figure out what I need to do to complete the match. So to find that I'm in a profession where we're supposed to be leaders and effectuating positive change, and I'm hearing from people that were tired of talking about the topic, that just to me was abhorrent. And I do appreciate the fact, as Einstein said, that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, that we need to figure out how to do things differently and be more innovative. But I went around the legal community proselytizing the fact that diversity fatigue cannot be an excuse for giving up the fight. And then in March of this year, COVID-19 hit. And I was extremely scared, like many of us D&I zealots in the legal profession and even above and beyond the legal profession, that we would do what we did in 2010 after the Great Recession hit, and that is take our eye off the ball of the D&I prize. We saw firsthand what happened when in-house counsel focused on what they needed to do to help their company achieve their goals and took their foot off the pedal with respect to demanding that law firms do more. The metrics basically show that from 2000 to 2009, we made some incremental progress in D&I, albeit very slow and relatively minor. But from 2010 to 2019, many of those numbers went backwards, and you'll see that in a few slides. So I was going around talking to law firms, in-house counsel, basically saying, let's not make the same mistakes we made after the Great Recession. If D&I is truly important to us as professionals, we have to focus on this during good times and bad times equally. And then in the end of May, we had the George Floyd murder. And what was interesting from my perspective is that incident occurred 2 weeks before that, 6 months before, 3 years before, and arguably 400 years before. And it's happened since, just 2 or 3 weeks ago. But then we saw a resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement. And people keep asking me, is this different? Has the legal profession figured out that D&I needs to be top of mind? And being fully transparent, because that's the only way I know how to be, the answer is I don't know. Because until we see the numbers and what happens today, tomorrow, 6 months from now, 2 years from now, I can't tell you if we've learned the lessons of the past. But what I will tell you is that I am not a Pollyanna, but I am optimistic because I am seeing some things that are different. I'm seeing white males talk about privilege to a degree that I've never seen. I'm seeing people want to hear more about my organization and hear this presentation a lot more. I'm seeing people trying to bake D&I into their DNA and part of their strategic imperatives, and that seems different. So my fingers are crossed, but we need to keep our eye on this to make sure that we make this a constant and not a wave that ebbs and flows like we've seen D&I since the very first in-house counsel job I had in 1984. So the key takeaway from this slide is we all need to keep diversity and inclusion top of mind now more than ever. Stephanie, next slide. So what we're going to do today, and one of my favorite mantras, and I'll try to give you a few Joel mantras and takeaways, it's time to stop admiring the problem we have in this profession and start solving. You know, I always tell people I became a lawyer way back in 1984 for primarily two reasons. Number one, I wasn't smart enough in math and science to be a doctor, which is what I really wanted to do, but I now get to live my life vicariously because my oldest daughter is a pediatrician in Lake Forest, Illinois. But number two is I wanted to be a lawyer because I wanted to lead change. I wanted to be part of leadership that makes this world better, and this country better, and the legal profession better. And to find myself in a legal profession where diversity and inclusion, we are dead last with respect to other professions, with respect to the hiring and retaining of minorities and women. It's a huge problem for me, and I hope it is for you. So we've got to figure out what do we do to solve. And there's this big debate whether we need to be more innovative or look at the things we've done. And the reality is this is not binary. We need to be more innovative and look at the great things Diversity Lab and other organizations are doing. But we need to look at the things that corporations and law firms are doing right, because there are things we are doing right. And we need to figure out how to make them more persistent, and we need to prioritize them. I will also share with you my self-deprecating journey through unconscious bias, and maybe some of you have had unconscious bias training, but you haven't gone through my journey, and I really do believe leaders learn through other leaders sharing their stories and sharing the things, the mistakes that we made so we don't have others make those same mistakes. I hope one of the highlights of this presentation is sharing with you D&I best practices within legal departments. I not only was tasked with creating a D&I legal program at Accenture in 2004, which was deemed to be best in class, but I had the unique vantage point. I get to see what Prudential and Microsoft and Shell and BP and Walgreens and Honda and other corporations are doing. And I love to share those best practices with other legal groups so you can look at it and figure out what you want to either do or continue doing within your respective organizations. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the association that I have the honor of being CEO of, NAMWOLF. And as Bridget said, we'll take questions at the very end of this presentation. If I was live, I'd take them throughout. It's just a little bit difficult. Next slide, please. So I told you about numbers, and I told you that this is what gets those CLE accreditors. So we're going to share a little bit about numbers. When I first gave this presentation, I didn't showcase numbers, not because they weren't important, but because nobody ever challenged me on the fact that our profession is so bad with respect to diversity and inclusion. So I didn't see the need to justify the rest of the presentation. So I'll just share a few slides with you. This is the NAWL report, the National Association of Women Lawyers. It comes out yearly, and this came out in December of 2019. I am terrible at math. I said that before, but simple math tells you that if women have been 50% of the law school graduating class for at least 10 years, then they should be at least 50% of all metrics in our profession. And not only do you see that they're not, but as women progress within their career, within legal, those gaps increase over time. So you'll see that women make up 47% of associates, but only 20% of equity partners. When you look at top earner spots at big law, 93% of firms report that their top earner is a man. And in most firms, 9 or 10 out of 10 of the top earners are male. And when you look at apples to apples compensation, women equity partners don't earn what the male counterpart makes. And that is something that we all need to be concerned about and focused on changing. Next slide, please. So if you think women have it bad, let's look at minorities. This is the National Association for Law Placement report. It comes out with a yearly report as well. And remember I told you what happened after the Great Recession in 2009, 2010? Look at the very first metric. The percentage of African American associates is 4.76. In 2009, it was 4.66. It was 2019 was the first year where the numbers finally exceeded the numbers pre-Great Recession for the African American associates. For all minorities, the percentage of associates has increased to 25.44%. But when you peel that onion back, a lot of that is attributable to a particular ethnicity, Asian American lawyers. Per the same report, women of color continue to be the most dramatically underrepresented group at the partner level. The percentage of minority partners grew less than half of a percentage point in 2019. The percentage of African American partners is discouragingly low at 1.97%. And on the in-house side, attorneys of color make up only 10.2% of Fortune 500 general counsels, but only 4% are women of color. Next slide. And again, when you peel that onion back, and I won't read this slide, but what I would suggest to you, and these slides are available to you at your request, the takeaway here, and it's a takeaway that I had to learn when I took this job in 2014, where I represent women and minority-owned law firms. I didn't necessarily segregate women and minorities, and even within minorities, I grouped them together, and that was a mistake. When we look at minorities, we have to look at whether you're Latinx or Asian American or African American. We have to look at the practice area you are. So if you're a labor employee Hispanic lawyer in Miami, that's a different set of issues that a bankruptcy female African American lawyer has in Milwaukee. We also have to look at the city where we're practicing. And what's interesting about this slide, because it tells you the biggest problem we have as a profession, it's not when summer associates come into the ranks of law firms and in-house counsel. They adequately respect the numbers of law school graduates. The problem is what happens 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, 7 year, 10 year, as women and or minorities progress through their legal career. When a law firm tells you that our entering class is 50% female and we have 23% minorities in the entering class, you cannot allow that answer to stand. You need to ask the next question. Very good, law firm. Now tell me what your unmanaged attrition is for women and or minorities, 3, 5, 7, 10, 12 years out. And if you can find a law firm that has the same unmanaged attrition for the white male versus a minority and or women, that law firm has figured out diversity inclusion. And I haven't found one yet. You'll see the bottom bullet here talks about the percentage of LGBT lawyers has increased slightly. However, I do believe that those numbers are underreported depending on where you are located. So we also need to focus on the LGBT or LGBTQ-owned community as well. Next slide, please. So I hope I don't really have to answer this question, but I think I'll ask it. It's like, why do we care as legal professionals? Well, I care for both professional and business reasons, but I think we need to care from the standpoint that the United States is going to be a majority minority nation in 2044. And the question we have to ask ourselves from a business perspective is, how do we do the best that we can do if our employee base is more heterogeneous and our consumer base is more heterogeneous than we are as a profession? It just does not align. We have got to reflect the employees we work with and the consumers we service if we want to be the best at what we do. Because if we aren't, then others that have figured it out are going to have much better returns on whatever they're trying to achieve than if we are more homogeneous. Next slide, please. This is one of my favorite slides because it shares with you my journey through the issue of business case versus moral case. I'll let you read it for a few seconds, but I will distill it for you. So what I love about this slide, I have a lot of respect for David Wilkins, a professor at Harvard who was a prior keynote speaker at one of NAMWOLF's annual meetings, is this slide really shares with you my view of whether we argue a moral case or a business case. When I first became a lawyer and I was in-house counsel at Allstate Insurance Company, I very quickly noticed that women weren't treated equitably. They would go off on maternity leave, they wouldn't come back, they came back and they had to start at the bottom of the ladder. They weren't treated fairly. I was a transactional lawyer and did big deals. When I made major compromises to get a deal done, I was considered amazing and wow and conciliatory and knows how to reach a good deal. And a woman who worked with me was a better transactional lawyer than I ever was. She did exactly the same thing, and she was perceived as weak and giving away the store. And if she took the same tone that I did, she was arrogant and aggravating the client, whereas nobody suggested I was the same. So I very quickly became focused on the gender issue in the legal profession. And I'm embarrassed to say that ethnicity and race was not a focus point for me. We had one black lawyer in the legal group, and we were giving ourselves high fives, and we were happy, and nobody talked about inclusion, and nobody talked about embracing him and how to make sure that he's happy, and how do we bring more African Americans, and what about Hispanics, and the acronym LGBTQ either didn't exist or nobody knew what it was. But over time, as I matured as a leader of large legal groups, obviously race and ethnicity came into play, and then the LGBTQ community. And for me, personally, the moral case was 100% all I needed to fight zealously to attain or fight for equality in our legal profession. But unfortunately, it wasn't enough for a lot of folks, including managing partners at big law firms. So in the early 2000s, an industry sprung up, and they were focused on showing the analytics that showed that the diversity inclusion is the smart thing to do. And that was great. But then a cottage industry sprung up a few years later, and that industry was sprung up just to fight the analytics and to argue, no, those numbers aren't appropriate, they don't align, and you have it all wrong. And there was this fascinating debate on whether there really is a business case for diversity inclusion. And because many people took their eye off the moral case, there was this give and take on whether or not it is appropriate to fight for D&I in the legal profession. And what I love about this slide, because it's something that I ask all of you to think about, is don't argue business versus moral. The reality is that we as legal professionals should be arguing the normative case for diversity and inclusion. We as legal professionals have a moral obligation to make our profession equal and also to fight for justice and equality outside of the legal profession. But there's also smart business reasons to do this. And that's what I love about this slide. Argue both, fight for both, live and breathe both. Next slide, Stephanie. And you can go to the next slide. A couple years ago, I just decided to get on the internet and look up the business case for diversity and inclusion. And what I love about this slide is recently the McKinsey report and other reports have numbers that are very similar to these, but even better. And again, I'm not going to read through all of this. You can read these. But in a nutshell, for those that I have to argue the business case, and that's all they care about, if I can tell you that corporations that have figured out D&I have higher financial returns, make more money, have more profit, have greater revenue, have more customer wins, have higher market share, have higher cash flow per employee, are more likely to be change ready, or more likely to be innovative. That's a pretty compelling sell. And I would argue a lot of this is transferable to the legal profession. In the last bullet, I haven't changed it because I don't have the footnote for the new number that I just saw a couple weeks ago, is for law firms, if I can tell equity partners that don't care about the moral case that they can make more profits per partner than law firms that haven't figured out, I would argue that that is very compelling. My favorite metric that you won't see here, but it's very personal, and I've challenged other in-house counsel that have told me the exact same thing, is you need to look at the engagement of your legal group. When I ran the America's legal team at Accenture and was also the COO of the global legal team, I was responsible for the global engagement of the legal group. And I had some pretty significant metrics each year tied to engagement. And the reason that was so important is because Accenture, like many other corporations, understood that the more engaged the legal group is, the more productive it will be, you will retain your talent, and you will attract even better talent. And the team will be happier, more satisfied, and work harder, which will lead to better results. So we measured engagement every year. And in 2005, the legal group in the Americas engagement scores skyrocketed. So I'm feeling really good, right? What a great leader they have. Oh, easiest place to work. We make way too much money. Love the hours. Simple job. Best internal clients in the world. Best external clients in the world. Well, hopefully some of that was a little bit true, but when we peeled that onion back again and tried to figure out why the engagement score skyrocketed, well, it wasn't a coincidence that we had just created a D&I legal program the year before. And when you looked at why the engagement score skyrocketed, our internal legal team in the Americas, from the general counsel on down to an administrative assistant working on the legal team, gave us so much credit for what we were doing and believed so much in what we were doing that their engagement increased significantly, which meant they said the right things about us, they strived to do their best every day, and they planned on staying 5 years or more. Critically important. And when I challenged other general counsels and leaders and legal groups to tell me what they thought about engagement in D&I, they said exactly the same thing. So in a nutshell, D&I is the smart thing to do. Now, Stephanie, the challenges on the next slide, I'm going to go through these relatively quickly, but I do want to share with you that in several states we have a moral and legal obligation to eliminate discriminatory practice in what we do in the hiring, promoting, and discharging or otherwise doing what we do in the legal profession or in representing or terminating representation of a client. So you will see here California. The next slide is New York. The next slide you will see is New York, and I'm thrilled to say now has a diversity requirement, just like Illinois and California and a few other states, but we basically impose upon all lawyers in the state of New York and a few other states the necessity of getting at least 1 hour credit for diversity inclusion, which I understand that this presentation will give you. The next slide, you'll see our friends in Illinois, which is my home state, has the same obligation. And then a nice segue into unconscious bias is California. Not only do they ask us to not discriminate in the practice of law, but they state, as codified, that lawyers have an ethical responsibility to eliminate bias in the legal profession, which is fantastic as we get into the next slide. So I'm going to make a few admissions against self-interest as it relates to unconscious bias, but again, learn from the foibles of me so you don't make the same mistakes. When I was 55 years old and about to take this job, I took the Harvard implicit bias test, but I took it for a very different reason than most people took it. I took it to confirm that I, Joel Stern, D&I zealot about to take a job focusing 24/7 on diversity inclusion, has no biases. I'm a lawyer, I'm educated, I'm self-aware, I know the good in me, the bad in me, the so-so in me. There is just nothing inside of me that's going to allow my brain to come to conclusions without realizing that I'm coming to those conclusions. So I took the Harvard implicit bias test. And I was shocked to find out when I took one of the tests, there's different tests for ethnicity and gender and beauty versus perceived unattractiveness, and I think religion. And I had a bias somewhere, and I was absolutely shocked. And I was about to write Harvard a note basically saying your academic institution's clearly gone downhill because you don't know how to give a test that accurately reflects what people really are. But I didn't, and 6 months later I took the same test again and had the same exact bias in the same exact area. So I took it again 6 months later. But this time I decided to jimmy the system and answer the questions the way that they wanted me to answer the questions as fast as I possibly could. So after 2 years and taking the test 3 times, I basically had to acknowledge that I had a bias that I had no idea I had for the first 55 years of my life. And the reason I focus on this is because it was such an epiphany for me and cathartic for me, and changed the entire way that I preached diversity inclusion in our legal profession. Let me give you an example. When I was at Accenture, I spent a lot of time talking to some of the biggest law firms in the world about D&I and how important it was to not only Accenture, but other corporations. And for years, I made a fallacious assumption. Here's what it was. I'd be speaking to a group of partners in a room. And I basically said, 25% of that audience. I can be totally ineffective. I can put my foot in my mouth. I can be low energy. I could just have the worst day possible. And they will walk out of that room excited about diversity inclusion and doing more because they walked into the room just as excited. So I ignored that group. 50% of the audience, I'm thinking, they're on the fence. If I'm good, if I can galvanize them, if I can keep them awake, if I can say some nuggets that basically get them interested in doing more or learning more, I have a chance to get them to do something tomorrow that they're not doing today. I ignored them. I went to the 20%, 25% of the audience, and I'm looking at them, and I'm thinking to myself, nothing I can do is going to change their minds. They're either curmudgeons, they're racist, they don't care. But I'm competitive. And I spent the next 45 minutes focusing on that 20 to 25%, trying to change their minds. And I was woefully unsuccessful. And I couldn't figure out why. But because I took unconscious bias training, I figured it out. It was the 50% that I ignored that I had a chance to change their minds that I didn't focus on. And because I didn't focus on them and just focus on an audience that wasn't going to be movable, that I wasn't successful in what I was trying to accomplish. So just for me, tapping into unconscious bias was incredible. And Stephanie, you can turn the slide. Now, by the way, a caveat. There is something out there called conscious bias. We have racists and bigots in our profession. We have them in society. And we're seeing them coming out a lot right now. But my personal opinion, I'm not going to be successful in changing years and years and years of buildup of bias to change their minds. So I'm not going to waste my time on that group. I'm going to spend my time on that 50%, and by the way, 25% that are already excited. This test and this level of understanding is so important because I believe it is the #1 impediment to this legal profession moving the ball forward. We have lots of good people that want to do the right thing, that aren't doing the right thing, because there are things in their brain that are coming to conclusions without them knowing that, without them being aware. I am absolutely convinced this is a game changer, and we all need to take this test, and we all need to do more than just take this test. Next slide, please. And there's lots of different biases, and by the way, if you really want bias training, it's not the 15 minutes that I'm going to spend here, and it's not an hour and a half you're going to spend with an expert. It's got to be continuous. It's a journey. I personally believe that unconscious bias is similar to a drug or alcohol addiction. You don't ever get cured. But if you understand it and you take steps to minimize it, you can be pretty much treated. So these are several different types of biases. I'm going to share with you 2 that I had that I didn't know of until the twilight of my career, and one that I think has a huge impact on us in the legal profession. So the 2 that I suffered from is the halo effect and the fundamental attribution error. The halo effect. When I was at Accenture, I interviewed every legal professional that came into the legal group in the Americas. Probably 90% of them. I may have missed 10%. And I was the final judge to whether or not that person would be employed or not. And what I didn't realize is that when you came into my office before the go, no-go decision, and your son played football at the University of Michigan, or your daughter played lacrosse at Syracuse, I had a much more likelihood perspective of thinking you're absolutely incredible and would be great for the legal group. Because for the next 45 minutes, we talked sports, and I love sports. And I subconsciously attached that love of sports and the affinity that we had towards a positive that you would be great in the legal group. Now, I'm embellishing a little bit. I don't think I was that bad. But if you liked Renaissance art or you had a passion for Shakespeare, instead of me focusing on your passion, which to me is absolutely incredible because I want passion in whatever you do, I got turned off, and that interview, I'm looking at my watch and waiting for it to get over with, and I was more likely not to find that you would be great for the legal group. The other one I suffered from was the fundamental attribution error, and ironically, this one benefited females over males, but again, it's still a bias, and I didn't know what it was. If a male and a female came in with the exact same resume and that resume had a gap in it, if you were a female, I subconsciously presumed, oh, you just had a baby and you took time off to take care of him or her. You're taking a sabbatical and doing things more important than the law. You're tending for a sick aunt. I just subconsciously presumed the best and not the worst. But that male that had that same gap, it's, when did you get out of jail? Why can't you hold a job? What's wrong with you? And therefore, in that same exact scenario, male versus female, the male probably wouldn't get through me, but the female had a very good chance of getting through me. Just two examples of biases that I had no clue that I had. The last one you see, and again, I like to change these slides every few months. This was not in the presentation in May, but I've added it because it really is a huge issue for all of us in the legal community. As we have this drive to bring in more minorities and women into our law firms and our corporations, we are assessing them. And we're assessing them compared oftentimes to an incumbent. And when we do that and we don't think about it, we are likely to basically say that Hispanic female or that African American male isn't as good. And this is what happens, right, when we bring in more women or bring in minorities. And by the way, I do not believe that, but this is what people think. But when you peel that onion back again, it's not because they're not as good as the white male. It's because you're comparing them to the incumbent that is more likely to be the white male. That incumbent knows you. They know what you like. They don't know what you don't like. If it's a law firm, they know when to bill you. They know whether you like an executive summary. They know where you like to eat. And you're subconsciously judging that incumbent with the new person, which hopefully is more and more minority and diverse in women. And it's an unfair comparison. And by understanding the incumbency bias, you can take steps to minimize them. With the halo effect, from the day that I figured out I had that bias, when somebody comes into my office and they love the Cleveland Browns or the Cleveland Indians, which are playing the Yankees tonight, and I have an hour meeting with them, I look at my watch, I spend no more than 5 minutes on sports. And by the way, conversely, if they love Shakespeare or Renaissance art, I make sure to understand their passion, because to me that's a key attribute to whether or not they're going to be successful. Next slide, please. So why is unconscious bias so important? I hope I've explained some of it, but it impacts every single thing we do. It impacts who we hire, who we promote, who we fire, who we mentor, clearly the overall engagement of the legal group. When you can tap into unconscious bias and figure it out and take steps to minimize it, you're going to increase the engagement of your legal group. It clearly impacts inclusion, because when we focus on numbers, only numbers, and we are not even cognizant of the importance of embracing the diversity we have and welcoming that diversity and treating that diversity talent equally, we are creating huge hurdles for the diversity within the group that we have. It has a huge impact with our perception of big firms, but also big firms internally. We've seen study after study that shows that the white male's memo, when graded compared to an African American woman, as an example, is graded much more favorably. Now, 6 years ago, I would have said, who's the bigot doing the grading? Today, I won't discount that small percentage of racism that exists in our profession, but I would suggest to you that the greater likelihood is that the person subconsciously is grading the paper and believes the white male is a better writer. We've seen this in the orchestra setting. They did a really interesting study in orchestras a few years ago. If you're third chair violin and you want to move to second chair violin, you challenge the second chair and you play a little bit. The second chair plays a little bit, and a judge assesses the performance, and the third chair is better than second chair. Third chair moves up to second chair. When they did a study and they showed the judge doesn't get to see who's playing, that women were 4 times more likely to win that audition. And I would suggest to you that unconscious bias plays a huge role there. It has a clear impact on supplier diversity. I'll give you two examples, and they're very near and dear to me. When I first took this position, I would be talking to people in the legal community and say, look, you've got to figure out how to use more minority and women-owned law firms. This is a really important cog of diversity and inclusion. And some people would come up to me, hey, Joel, I used a Asian American female firm in San Diego on a labor employment matter, and they weren't good. I go, okay. I go, do you ever use Baker? You ever use Sibley? You ever use Hogan, DLA Piper, Kirkland? Name your big firm. Oh, yeah, all the time. You ever have a bad experience with a lawyer? Oh, yeah, that happens a lot. I go, what do you do? Well, we normally let them redo the assignment. They write it off. We ask for another lawyer. I go, did you ever fire the law firm? In most cases, no. Okay. Did you ever say, I had a bad experience at Sidley, I'm never going to use a white male-owned law firm? Joel, don't be ridiculous. I go, well, who's being ridiculous? You just said to me I had a bad experience with a Asian American female law firm in San Diego, and therefore I'm not going to use minority and women-owned law firms? I mean, that's ridiculous. You're holding minority and women-owned law firms to a higher standard than you are white male-owned law firms. Hold them to the same standard. I can live with that. But do not hold them to a higher standard and understand the biases that you have. I'll give you one more example. A few years into this job, the largest African-American-owned law firm in NAMWOLF in the country dissolved, over 300 lawyers. And they didn't dissolve because they weren't making money, because they weren't good. They dissolved because as they got bigger, they had more cultural acclamation issues. As partners wanted to go one way, other partners wanted to go another way. And it closed like law firms close every day, like businesses close every day. The very next day, I got harangued by the press, by corporations, and by law firms saying, is this the demise of the minority-owned law firm? And I said, interesting question, and your timing is fortuitous, because literally in that week, a large white male-owned Jewish law firm in Washington, D.C. dissolved, Dickstein and Shapiro, a law firm that I liked and respected and used when I was at Accenture. But I didn't get any phone calls from people saying, is this the demise of the white male-owned Jewish-owned law firm? Why can't one minority-owned law firm dissolve in NAMWOLF or in the United States without people suggesting that this is the end of minority women-owned law firms? Again, it's not fair, and again, I think it's unconscious bias. Next slide, please. So what do? Well, first you need to understand that you have biases and take steps to solve them. It was so hard for me to acknowledge that I had the biases. It was even harder for me to share those biases with people that I trust, that are constructively critical of my performance. And I said to them, here are my biases, and here are the things that I'm going to do to minimize them. And I test that twice a year with my friends and see if I'm making progress. And fortunately, they're honest enough to say you've made progress here, but you really haven't made progress there, but you need to stay on top of them. Also, consult with experts. There's so many incredible experts. I used to have Renee Myers here. I absolutely adore her. She's now head of diversity and inclusion at Netflix. And my quick Renee Myers story, she is an African-American female, and I only say that because I think it makes the story even more compelling. She is a D&I zealot and an unconscious bias expert above any other expert that I am familiar with. And she tells the story much more eloquently than I could. She gets on an airplane and she sees an African-American female captain and an Asian-American female co-pilot. And she's saying, geez, I've never seen this before. This is great. I'm going to change all my future flights to this airline. And she's feeling really good and really excited. She gets on the plane. Plane takes off. She starts to work. She's having her Coke. And all of a sudden, the plane encounters unanticipated severe turbulence. And the first thoughts out of her mind is, where's the white guy in the cockpit? And I share that story only because you may believe that I have biases, and that's not surprising to you. But if there's one person you would think would have zero biases, it is Renee Myers. And the fact that she tells that story to me basically is clearly indicates that we all have biases. Michelle Silverthorne is one of my favorites. She just spoke at our annual meeting. She's CEO of an organization called Inclusion Nation. There's many amazing D&I unconscious bias experts on the East Coast as well. But this is something I'd recommend that all legal groups undergo training, and that training needs to be continuous. Next slide. So before we move into the next area, I'm going to give the first code for CLE accreditation. That is 21619. I will repeat, 21619. So as we move into the next part of the presentation, this is one where I hope you find lots of takeaways. And let me be clear, my goal is not to get you to basically write all these things down and bring them into your legal group and do all of them. My goal is to get you to think about it in the way that I suggest you think about it, and for those things that are exciting to you, that resonate with you, to bring them back to your legal groups and figure out what to do. The other point I will make is I don't know whether your legal group is 3 or 3,000, because I've talked to and met with and worked with legal groups of both, but I would suggest to you that the framework that I'm going to give you works for a legal group of 3 or 3,000. Next slide, please. So I tell this story. I gave this presentation a few years ago to a general counsel and their legal group of a large bank in the Carolinas. And the general counsel said to me, you know, Joel, you have 16 slides on this. It'd be really great if you could take all this and put it in one slide. And I said, I don't think I can do it. And obviously on the flight back, I did it and shared it with her, and she liked it. The other thing I love about this slide is I gave this presentation to a healthcare company around 6 years ago, and I shared this slide. They did not have a D&I program. They couldn't spell diversity if you gave it to them. And I went back 2 years ago and met with brand new lawyers that didn't know me from Adam, and they were so excited about the D&I program that they put in place, and they had exactly this slide. So that suggests to me that what they were doing, it works. It really does. I will tell you that with a great degree of certainty. Before we talk about the things on the right-hand side, I think it's important to share with you the things on the left-hand side. I've seen enough D&I programs in place to tell you that if your legal group is not willing to do the things that are on the left-hand side, it has a great chance of failing. And what I would suggest to you, and this is a hard one to swallow, that if you're not going to do the things on the left-hand side, you're probably better off not doing anything to begin with, because there's only one thing worse to not doing it well. It's saying you're going to do it and not doing it well. So if you tell people it's not a priority and you don't put any effort into it and you don't do anything, that's pretty bad. But when you tell people it's really important, this is one of the things we're very concerned about with all these calls to actions, right? Are they calls without actions? Because you're creating a group of disgruntled employees, and rightfully so. So to take these programs and these actions and turn them into something that lasts forever, these are the things that you need to do. It is easy to say that you need top-down support. What is more difficult to understand is that when the CLO or general counsel says this is important, the reality is I've never seen a legal group where the general counsel is doing most of the work. This is not what they should be doing in most cases. They need that bottoms-up and middle support. The best legal groups I've seen that are doing D&I programs, it's that 6 to 10-year attorney that is driving the entire legal group, both looking up and looking down, into an enormous amount of inertia that's leading to amazing tangible results. So top-down, bottoms-up, middle support is key. You need to have accountability defined. You need to have an articulated mission and vision statement that creates the framework for what your D&I program is going to look like. You need to have accountability. When I was at Accenture, every single employee in the Americas, from the general counsel on down to the administrative assistant or first-year lawyer, had an obligation, a metric in the D&I area. I was also fortunate, and this is something you can do with a large legal group, a little bit more difficult to do with a smaller legal group, is I tasked one of my transactional lawyers that for the next 2 years, 40% of his job is going to be standing up the D&I program, which meant that 40% of his performance metrics were aligned to D&I, and 40% of his compensation raise was tied to D&I. That is the type of accountability that you need to do or it will not work. It needs to be embedded in your core values. I love the story. I go to a large energy company in Philadelphia, and I walk up on the general counsel's floor where the legal group is, and he's got his core values on the wall. And the second one is diversity and inclusion. And when he meets with his deputy general counsels every 2 months, D&I is on the agenda, and it doesn't get off the agenda because there's other more important pressing matters, because D&I is always a pressing matter. When you embed it in your core value and it's in your DNA and it's talked about every day, you have a chance to make the program work. It needs to be managed as a strategic imperative. It is not philanthropy. It is not a hobby. It is not a nice to have. It's not, I have to do it because my boss is telling me to. It is something that is equally, if not more important than any other strategic imperative that you have. Because if it isn't, we will repeat the sins that we committed in 2010 when it was never a strategic imperative and we basically took our eye off the prize and focused on other things that we deemed to be more important. There can be nothing more important than creating a diverse and inclusive legal group. I am very Pavlovian. I believe you need carrots and sticks. I have 3 daughters. It's the way I raised them. I coach one of my daughter's soccer teams that way. It's the way I've led teams. You have to reward the behavior you want, and you have to punish the behavior you don't want. And by the way, that also applies to how we look at law firms, which we'll talk about in a second. You have to create goals. They have to be concrete. They have to be sustainable. They have to be measured. And once you attain those goals, you have to raise the bar higher and go for even more tougher goals to achieve. You need to share your successes and go after the awards, and you need to have failures, because if you don't have failures, it means you're not being innovative enough. And I've had plenty of failures. And the reason going after awards is important really are twofold. Number one, I'm not going to minimize the ego fulfillment of winning awards. We all have egos, some larger than others, and getting awards for the work that we did in the D&I area is something that is a positive. But the more important reason to go after the MCCA awards, the ACC awards, the NAMWOLF awards, the other awards that are out there in the D&I space, is because the very next day you get that award, I promise you, the next meeting you have with leadership is, what do we need to do to raise the bar higher? What do we do next? So winning awards has this continuous loop of how do we raise the bar higher and even do more in D&I. And the last one on the left-hand side is legal leads and not follows. I have never been in a revenue producer job. I have always been legal support of corporations that earn their money by means other than providing legal services. And in the annual report that Accenture had every year, there was always that great paragraph that you'd see that if this litigation goes south, it can have an adverse material impact on the Accenture share price. And then one year when I was at Accenture, and I remember it like it was yesterday, it was 15 years ago, there was another paragraph in the Accenture annual report, and it was a wow paragraph. Look at what the Accenture Legal Group is doing in the diversity inclusion space, specifically supplier diversity. Wow. To have those words that are very expensive in those annual reports basically have a proactive, nice to see paragraph talking about what the Accenture Americas Legal Group was doing in diversity inclusion was something that our people to this day never forgot. And to have HR and IT and finance and even the revenue producers say, what are you guys doing? How do we emulate that? What should we be doing in this area? It's incredible. It's the reason I became a lawyer, which was to lead and not follow. So again, if you do these things on the left-hand side, you have a good chance of having a program that you're proud of and that is actually effectuating the change that you want to see. Now, the right-hand side, these are the pillars of the house. And again, whether you have a legal group of 3 or 3,000, I would suggest to you this is the way you should look at the way you're organizing your program. And by the way, for law firms that may be listening or that you're talking to, they need to see what you're doing. But a lot of this is transferable with respect to the way they should be looking at their own programs. So again, the difference is a Walmart who has hundreds and hundreds of lawyers may have 10 or 12 things under each pillar, whereas a law group of 30 or 40 people may have 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. It doesn't matter. But if you don't look at your program with all 4 of these pillars, you are missing a critical piece of the solution. So I'm gonna written down some notes on this one just because I don't like to miss things. When you look at internal focus, you cannot tell others what to do without focusing on what you look like internally. And again, diversity without inclusion does not solve. And while I love affinity groups, and they do absolutely amazing things, unless you have a group of people that is inclusive, and that includes the white male over 40 that's rolling up his sleeves and part of finding the solution, I fear that you're not going to be successful. So inclusion of everyone is key in the efforts. I love going to law firms and asking to meet with their D&I legal committees. And when I go and visit them and everybody's 35 and under and women and or minorities, I tell the law firm that they have a problem because you're not going to solve unless you have everybody in the room. So on the internal side, the questions that you should be asking yourself is, do you have a D&I committee? If so, who is on it? Is it diverse? Is it inclusive? Do you have executives that are white males who are on the committee? Do you have a mission and vision statement articulated? Does your program address all 4 pillars? If not, as I said before, it's missing an important piece. Do you have a technology that allows you to track the progress that you want? Have you reviewed your hiring and promotion processes to ensure that there's no bias, conscious or unconscious, in them? One of the best recommendations I give you is to use your HR groups or consultants to come in and look at all your processes, to get rid of the biases that is often in there. How do you hire? Have you thought about expanding your horizon? One of the biggest pieces that kind of segues into pipeline diversity is don't ever let somebody tell you, I can't find black talent. What I will tell them is open up your eyes. And for law firms that only recruit at the top X law schools, they need to expand their universe. When I go out to HBCU law schools and meet with these kids and look at the mountains they've climbed that I've never even seen, these kids are going to be incredible lawyers, and they're not even being looked at. I always tell my story when people go to recruit at Duke and they don't walk 10 minutes to NCCU and give these kids at the top of their class the opportunity to wow you, you are missing a huge opportunity. Has your internal legal group gone for awards? If not, please go for the awards. Are you a signatory to ABA Resolution 113? Have you signed up to the Mansfield Rule? Do your folks have goals aligned to diversity and inclusion? If not, that's a major problem. And do you have a carrots and sticks program with all the employees in your legal group? What have you done to form a more inclusive group? Do you have a mentoring program in place? Do you cross-mentor with your law firms? I love cross-mentoring with law firms. It's incredible for everybody. What are the specific actions you're taking as an internal legal group to be more inclusive? Are you bringing in experts periodically to help you with diversity and inclusion? Turning to big firms, and big firms has got to be a critical piece of the equation. If I am successful in getting you excited about NAMWOLF, the reality is that 90% of your outside counsel spend is still going to be with big law firms, so we need to spend a lot of attention with them. Do you inform your law firms that D&I is important and that you will drive more business to your law firms that are doing more and give less business to law firms that aren't taking you seriously? What approach are you using? JP Morgan Chase has made a commitment to make sure that 50% of its work at all levels is given out to diverse attorneys. Hewlett Packard has a holdback, 10% holdback for all law firms that they only get if they meet or exceed the diversity metrics that are imposed upon them. Microsoft has a rewards program, and what is unique about their program is they not only reward the law firm that is doing the things they want, but they reward the in-house counsel that's awarding the work to the law firms for doing the things that they want. Are you having your firms fill out surveys? What do you do with those surveys when they fill them out? If they fill them out and you put it in a drawer, which is what law firms think you're doing, you're sending a really bad signal to not only them, but it's adversely impacting other corporations that take these surveys seriously. The best legal groups look at these surveys. They compare them, big law to big law, tier 2 to tier 2, tier 3 to tier 3, And then they go back to the law firms and they say, here's what you're doing that's not as good as other law firms are doing, and here's what we expect. And we'll start by measuring efforts, but over time we're going to measure results. And we're going to consciously move business to firms that are doing what we ask them to do. That is the commitment that legal groups need to do if you want to change the way things are. Do you have technology to understand what law firms are doing what and who's doing the work at each law firm? Do you ask about D&I in your RFP, your RFI, your reverse auction process? It's critical to make diversity inclusion an element that is scored when you're determining what law firms to give business to. Who are your law firm relationship partners? Walmart switched out over 300 white male client relationship partners with diverse client relationship partners. When I was at Accenture, I didn't do that. I realized we had some good white male relationship partners, but when we did and we didn't want to switch them out, we said, please bring a minority and or woman successor client relationship partner into our meetings so they're either trained to take your place or better trained to be a client relationship partner somewhere else. Are you asking Big Law the right questions? Do not allow them to tout their entering class numbers. Ask them who their top earners are. Ask them who is in the C-suite. Ask them how many equity partners are female and or minority and what they're going to do. Ask them where they're recruiting. Don't allow them to tell you that they can't find the talent that is out there. Are you asking your firms to be Mansfield Rule compliant? And again, I'm happy to explain that during the Q&A period if you're not familiar with what that is. My favorite one, and it's a really tough one, it was controversial when I said it 15 years ago, but it seems to be in vogue right now. Are you asking your firms who's getting the origination credit? You know, the reality is that women aren't becoming equity partners to the numbers they deserve because they're not getting origination credit. You've got to follow the money to the extent that they can. You need to make sure that the attorney that is the reason you're doing business with that firm is getting credit for the origination and not somebody who historically had the business 30 years ago. I love the story. In 1995, I brought in a very large law firm to do Y2K law and help us out at Accenture. 20 years later, that law firm is doing compliance and tax and regulatory work for Accenture. And the white male partner who was the Y2K lawyer that basically helped us from 1996 to 2000 had nothing to do with the success of this law firm and having such deep roots into the Accenture Legal Group. But he was getting 100% of the origination credit. That is not right. And don't let a law firm tell you it's none of your business, because if they say that, they have the right to tell you that, but you are the buyer. You control the ability to make sure that equity is occurring with respect to the origination credit. Are you asking Big Law to partner with minority and women-owned law firms when it makes sense? We know many times your law firms have to reach out to other law firms, whether it's local counsel needs, bandwidth, conflicts, don't have the area of expertise. One of the takeaways I'd encourage you to think about is from this moment on, when Big Law is telling you we got to get another law firm, ask them, have you looked at the NAMWOLF list of minority women-owned law firms? Because they're amazing and they can do the job and they're out there. In an article that hopefully you have, if not, Stephanie can send it to you, we've written an article on the power of partnerships that my good friend Nate St. Victor at Morgan Stanley helped write, who's a big believer in the power of partnerships. Ask your big firms from now on when they need to partner, first look at minority and women-owned law firms, whether they're part of NAMWOLF or not. Have you thought about mentoring minority and women attorneys at Big Law? Picture you having a program where you bring in an African-American first-year associate at Big Law, spend some time in your group, you mentor them, they develop relationships with you, you like them, they like you, they go back to their law firm, they develop their skills, they're starting to get business on their own. You're going to be giving them a lot of business because of that experience, the seeds that you planted with that young minority lawyer as a first or second year associate. Again, cross-mentoring, and by the way, doing it the converse side works very well as well. Pipeline diversity, I will tell you very selfishly, it is one of my absolute favorites. I personally believe that pipeline is the only panacea to what ails this profession. but we need to look at pipeline diversity very differently than what we're doing today. Pipeline diversity cannot be focused on young lawyers. It needs to be law students, college students, high school, and probably most importantly, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. The best pipeline diversity initiative I was ever a part of was working with the Constitutional Rights Foundation of Chicago and teaching constitutional law in the inner city of Chicago to kids which were the great majority blacks who basically didn't see authoritative figures in a positive light for the most part, didn't see white males in a positive light, had no desire to ever be a lawyer. And when you can plant the seeds and get them excited about the law, and as long as you have some patience, which I'm losing the older I get, someday that you can see those seeds turn into beautiful plants and they become lawyers someday, it is absolutely incredible. And I don't have time to share it with you today, but I will tell you, we say we do pipeline for the kids. The reality is pipeline is so good for all of us. I have learned more lessons about diversity inclusion from 6th and 7th graders than I have from people of my age or younger lawyers in our profession. A few years ago, we were in class, and I was with 2 other black lawyers teaching this class that was 99% black. And at the end of the class, they asked questions. And one of the kids asked the question. It happened to be the one white young lady in the class. And she said, why isn't it all lives matter? You know, why is it Black Lives Matter? What about all lives? And the black partner on the left and the black partner on the right pointing their fingers at Joel, the white male, and said, Joel will take that one. And for the next hour and a half, we went an hour and a half over the time that was allotted to us. We had the most incredible discussion how all lives matter can't matter until Black Lives Matter, and the genesis of the Black Lives Matter, and the concept of privilege. And I walked away from that class basically reading more books and learning about the privilege that I was born with that I'm not proud of, but I can't be ashamed of, but I can't change it. But it gave me such a better understanding of why I need to do more in this space, which we'll talk about later. But what resonated from that discussion I had with 6th and 7th graders is, why am I having this amazing discussion with 6th and 7th graders and not with lawyers in the profession, including many white males or females that don't understand Black Lives Matter, that would consider themselves liberal and non-racist and all those other things, but still don't understand the importance of the Black Lives Matter movement. If we had that discussion that I had with 6th and 7th graders as adults, I do believe this world would be a lot better. Suffice it to say, I love pipeline. If you're not doing anything there, please do it. And by the way, if you have a smaller legal group, I have never met a law firm that would not allow you to partner with them and all the amazing pipeline diversity initiatives that they have in place. The next area is supplier diversity, and that's NAMWOLF, and you can turn the slide, Stephanie. So let's talk about supplier diversity at the corporate level. Most of your corporations have highly touted supplier diversity initiatives at the corporate level. And what are they? Well, what they are extremely important initiatives that your corporation has put in place because they believe that women and minorities have been historically economically disadvantaged in the workplace. So when these women and minorities at IBM or Apple or whatever else, the products and services they work for, they go off and they start their own companies that are majority owned by them as women and or minorities, that we as a corporation need to give them the opportunity to compete for and win the business. Most corporations, if you Google them, you go on their websites, you will look at their corporate supplier diversity initiatives, and they talk about them as they should, as extremely important. So let's look at the legal profession. The legal profession, as I said, is dead last with respect to the hiring and retaining of minorities and women. So why is it that when I talk to general counsels, that many of them don't understand the importance of adhering to their supplier diversity initiatives? So the corporation's widgets or services that they're procuring from minority and women organizations are the same as your internal legal group's legal services that can be provided by minority and or women-owned law firms. I have never, ever seen a supplier diversity initiative program at the corporate level that carved out legal or exempted legal. But I've seen many corporate legal groups that don't understand the difference between big firm diversity and supplier diversity. So let me make it very clear. You need to keep demanding from your law firms diverse talent at all levels, and ask for Blacks and Hispanics and openly gay and females and veteran and disabled lawyers that are doing your work at big law. That needs to be of critical importance. But you also need to be giving minority and women-owned law firms the opportunity to compete for and win the business. They're leaving big law at 10x the white male. They're either leaving the profession altogether, they're going in-house, which is incredible, or they're showing the entrepreneurial courage to start their own law firms. All they want is the opportunity to showcase how incredibly talented they are in their new law firms, which, by the way, they already showed you how incredibly talented they were at the law firms they were. NAMWOLF, next slide please, is all about supplier diversity. And you can go to the next slide, Stephanie. NAMWOLF is about D&I, but with a focus on supplier diversity. We are a nonprofit trade association formed in 2001. We're composed of law firms that are all truly minority and women LGBTQ owned. When I fell in love with NAMWOLF, the general counsel of DuPont and Microsoft knocked on my door in 2004 and told me about this little organization with 3 to 5 law firms and maybe 3 corporations. Accenture became the 4th that joined. Today in 2020, there's almost 200 law firms and hundreds of corporations, including many in the financial services industry that believe in what we do. We believe an extremely effective way for corporations to increase diversity in the profession is to increase their retention of minority and women-owned law firms. And let me tell you something that's really important. I represent some incredible attorneys and law firms. And I've been in this job for 6 years. I've been affiliated with this organization since 2004. I've never once had a law firm say to me, I deserve the business because I'm Black, or I'm Hispanic, or I'm gay, or I'm female. Never. I have heard them say, and I have said, we deserve the opportunity to show corporations like who I'm talking to today how great we are and how we can do the work. Only give us the work if we're of the quality and the value that you're looking for. But please give us that opportunity. Think of NAMWOLF as a gourmet kitchen with some incredible delicacies, including the SRD Legal Group. And you are the chefs. And we provide an amazing environment where you can shop for these delicacies to exceed the quality that you want, to exceed the value you want, and to support diversity and inclusion. I personally think it's a compelling value proposition. It's why I brought NAMWOLF into Accenture. And 17 years later, Accenture is still using several different minority and women-owned law firms. Next slide, please. This is our mission. Key thing here is high caliber law firms, and also key is that our lawyers, as you'll see represented again with SRD Legal Group, we provide services in a myriad of different practice areas, not only labor and employment, not only litigation, but complex trials, class actions, patent prosecution in the pharma space, insurance and corporate law, just to name a few. Next slide, please. Why hire minority and women-owned law firms? I think I've said this before, but most of our lawyers came from big law firms where they not only survive, but they thrive. We have a huge geographical footprint. We have almost 200 law firms, expertise in many practice areas, and we align perfectly with your corporate supplier diversity initiatives. Next slide, please. This is a really important slide for all of you. You have to be more than just certified as truly minority and women-owned to get into NAMWOLF. You have to be credentialed as of the type of law firms that do the work that you're doing today. So as part of the process, Sharice Rodriguez on my team gets 3 Fortune 500 client references from the prospective law firm. She meets with them, she talks with them. It goes through a law firm admission committee process that is primarily driven by in-house counsel. I used to run it when I was in-house. And lots of firms don't get through that barrier. They can then go through it again. They then have to go to the board reviews them and potentially approves them. It is a long, elongated, onerous vetting process for law firms to get into NAMWOLF. But it's supposed to give you comfort in your industry with complex legal needs, these are the types of law firms that can do the type of work that we have. Next slide, please. This is our geographical footprint. As you can see, we're in most states. There's a few we're not, but plenty of law firms in New York, New Jersey, DC, Florida, Illinois, Texas, California, Colorado, just to name a few. Next slide, please. This is another takeaway slide. We want to make it very easy for you to find law firms. There's lots of different ways to do it. You can look at our corporate counsel guide. It's a hard document. We update it quarterly. It's on our website. It lists law firms by states, and then it lists law firms by practice area. You can marry them up. I call it the baby boomer way because it's the way that I like to use. Nobody else likes to use it, but I still use it. But it's also a nice little concise document to keep on your credenza. You can go on our website. You can do member firm searches. They're not perfect because it's only as good as you define the practice area and the sub-practice area, but you can also look at practice area committees that I'll talk about in the next slide, and each one of them has a directory. So you will see financial services litigation, or you will see transaction, and you'll see banking and finance committee. A terrific way to find slides. My favorite way of finding law firms my entire career was asking in-house counsel. We have an incredible in-house counsel network, including several in your industry. And then we've developed something that many have used called the anonymous solicitation process. We do 80% of the due diligence for you. You say, Joel, you've intrigued me. I'd like to see what your law firms can do in a specific area. We can reach out to our law firms. We basically ask them a series of questions you want us to ask them. Think of it as a mini RFI. They answer them. We electronically put it together. We send you a book electronically, and you can read through it and figure out what law firms you want to interview. We've done over 1,000 of these. They've led to hundreds of interviews and hundreds of engagements. Very, very popular device to help corporate legal groups find amazing talent. Next slide, please. These are the 10 practice area committees I talked about. Several that are probably very relevant for you, including the financial services litigation one, the transactional one, which again has different components, including the financial services industry, and the trials one. All of these practice area committees love to come out and do CLEs for you in this environment, virtual. So if you want free CLEs, but plus the opportunity to meet some of these law firms, just let me know. I can hook you up with the chairs of any one of these committees. Next slide, please. We have two programs, and I'm going to talk very briefly about these. One is our NAMWOLF Partner Program. Over 146 corporations have signed up to it. This, to me, is a great foundational program for corporations that are serious about this to basically aspire to commit 5% of their outside counsel budget with minority and women-owned law firms. When I was at NAMWOLF, Accenture, we signed this. It took us 5 years to go from 0 to 5%. Don't worry, because I know a lot of you have international operations. You can make the denominator what you want. You can take out pieces you're not comfortable with. But this is the program that really shows me more than any other program how serious a corporate legal group is in giving minority and women-owned law firms the opportunity to compete for business. It's a carrots-only program. We don't audit you. We don't shame you. You tell us when you've hit certain plateaus, and we love to announce you. If you look at the next slide, it's just a couple corporations that I have permission to share with you. And you'll see there, Prudential, FDIC is incredible with NAMWOLF. KeyBank is another one, but these are large corporations, two of my former employers, Allstate and Accenture. Proud to see them here. The next program, and I only share it with you to share with you the types of corporations that are giving millions of dollars of business to minority and women-owned law firms. This is the Inclusion Initiative. And in 7 years, these 33 corporations have given over $1 billion to minority and women-owned law firms. Each year, they individually give one person on my team their goals. We aggregate those goals. We tell the world what the goal is. A year later, we ask them what they committed, or what they achieved. They tell us what they achieved. We aggregate the achievement, and we tell the world that these 33 corporations had given $300 million of business to minority and women-owned law firms in the preceding year. Great branding, and Stephanie, turn it to the next slide. Look at the corporations that are part of this. Bank of America, that just won a NAMWOLF award this year. FDIC, JP Morgan Chase is there. Morgan Stanley is there. Prudential is there. Wells Fargo is there. Again, and I know I'm speaking to the financial services industry here, we'd love to see your corporations either join this program and or the other program to basically help you get teeth into your program. Next slide, please. This is our in-house advisory council. Again, I used to run this for a few years when I was in-house counsel. This is the group of in-house counsel that I absolutely love and respect and admire. They help drive our strategy, make us better. If you look at the next slide, you will see these are the in-house counsel and the corporations that are the most active in our organization. Justy just stepped down, so Chris Luna from Metro T-Mobile, Vanessa Watson at MasterCard, which is very active in our organization, and then Michael Danforth at USAA. But you'll see the corporations that are on the advisory council, and that number will increase significantly as a result of our recent annual meeting a few weeks ago, where more people want to join. Next slide, please, and we're almost done. We just had our virtual annual meeting. I'm proud to say we had over 1,300 people in attendance. We had over 800 in-house counsel. We had Senator Tammy Duckworth speak. We had CLEs. We had our general counsel panel. Hopefully next year's meeting in Baltimore will be live, but if you want to attend our meetings, they are free to in-house counsel. They are the best way to fall in love with the organization. Stay tuned for more details, but I'm not going to ask you for I'm not going to ask you to register for a meeting that was held last week, but just a terrific way to get people to fall in love with the organization. We are planning to have a Driving Diversity Leadership Conference in February. Stay tuned as we try to navigate ourselves around COVID-19. My last slide. So I used to have Mahatma Gandhi's picture here. I'm absolutely convinced that he said this or something very close to it, but I was challenged on it once, so I got afraid and I took his picture off. But I'm telling you, I am giving Mahatma Gandhi attribution. If you don't think it was Mahatma Gandhi, you can give it to me. I am not suggesting that anybody give up their day jobs like I did in 2014 and became a diversity inclusion person 24/7. But I will tell you, for me, that for years I thought I wrote the right checks, I did the right things, I said the right things, I acted the right way, and the world wasn't changing fast enough for me. So I decided to become the change and do this, because to me, if I become the change, it has a much better chance of seeing the world change the way I want it to be. But for all of you, I would say don't give up your day jobs. You're doing amazing and terrific things. But if you really want to become the change in the D&I space, you need to live and breathe D&I each and every day. And when I measure the success of this session with all of you, the way I judge it is if you do something tomorrow in this space that you wouldn't have done but for this presentation, then I am smiling, and I think that I've helped change the world in which we live in. When the George Floyd murder occurred, I decided every day to basically do a few things differently than I've ever done before. And I wrote them down, again, in my way of changing the world in which we live in. One, every single morning I wake up and the first thing I say is Black Lives Matter. Number two is I started giving money to organizations that I hadn't given money to, like the NAACP, the Southern Poverty Law Center. Number three is I no longer am silent. I used to be silent sometimes, and I think silent is complicity. Number four, I understand it's not enough to be not a racist, you need to be an anti-racist. Number five is I spend a lot more time mentoring with kids that I never mentored before, with a specific emphasis on African Americans, with a specific emphasis in HBCU law schools. And last, I do not suffer microaggressions. I normally would just be quiet when I see them. Now when I see them, I act upon them in an effort to educate. These are the types of things that individually we have to do in our profession to change the world. So with that, normally I go to questions, but now I want to turn it over to Suzie from SRD Legal Group. Just a few things about this legal group. They exemplify so perfectly what a NAMWOLF law firm is when they're top of game. They're a woman-owned virtual law firm. They have 25 or so attorneys. They have several different competencies. They have clients that are top of their game. They just basically, when I think about law firms that are basically top of their game, SRD Legal Group comes in very high on the list, and I'm thrilled that they get to talk a little bit about their law firm, and hopefully if you love their law firm, you'll give them a look, but you also give some of our other law firms a look. And with that, Suzie, all yours.
Thank you so much, Joel. I've known Joel since my firm joined NAMWOLF, and he is a true champion of diversity. And it's hard to follow you, Joel. I will say that I am really pleased that you did not interview me when you were at Accenture, because I was a medieval studies major and I spent 1 year in college studying Shakespeare. Nothing but Shakespeare. We read everything he wrote, and I have no interest in sports at all. I do own a pair of sneakers. I don't go to the gym. I don't play golf or tennis or anything, but I can count fundraising as a sport, and that's my exercise. So, so glad I missed that interview. I found that really interesting. I think the most important thing I want to share right now to get everyone's attention is the CLE code, so that everybody on this call can get credit. So the second CLE code is 81965, and I will repeat it. The CLE code is 81965. So thank you so much for having me and giving me a few minutes to tell you about SRD Legal Group. SRD is an example of a NAMWOLF firm. We so happen to be a woman-owned virtual law firm, and the virtual piece for us has become really interesting. When we first started the firm, I almost was a little apologetic about being virtual, and it was, we intended to allow lawyers to work from where they are, physically and also just professionally. And what we discovered was it was really important to give lawyers flexibility to be untethered and work from their homes for a variety of reasons, which I'll share in a few moments. But we have found that that structure has been a very good formula for allowing lawyers to be happy. And there is science and data behind this. When lawyers are happy, they perform at higher levels. And that was the goal. What I have found so interesting about COVID, and that the whole world has joined us and pivoted to this work from home model, is any of the doubt that anybody has ever had about a lawyer working from home being on a frolic has been cured. Because everybody knows who has been working from home that you can be productive, do meaningful work, and get it done from your home office. And I know some of us have had more challenges than others with managing our children and households, and it's definitely not always easy, but absolutely working from home is a viable way to get work done. The impact for our clients, because of our virtual model, has always been a very big cost savings. So typically the big law model is 1/3 of the fee goes to partners, 1/3 goes to the lawyers doing the work, and 1/3 goes to the overhead. We completely eliminated that bricks and mortar expense, and it's benefited our lawyers, who we can pay more to, which allows us to attract and retain incredible lawyers. And I'll introduce my colleague Andy shortly. But it also allows us to charge lower rates, which has been deeply valued by our clients. So here's why we were invited to join. We wanted to show you what a NAMWOLF firm looks like. Joel mentioned there are about 200 NAMWOLF firms comprised of about 3,000 lawyers, and SRD is representative of one of them. SRD represents several global banks. In advance of this presentation, I was able to get permission to share that we proudly do work for Deutsche Bank and Macquarie, and we represent other large global banks as well. And just in the interest of ensuring that we are meeting all our obligations, I won't share all of the names, but SRD represents US-based global banks, private equity firms, large insurance companies, and asset managers. And during Joel's presentation, he mentioned the power of partnership. And I want to share how real this is. And it's been fascinating because at SRD, we've seen this develop organically, where we have had some of our very large clients say, we want you, SRD, to partner with Big Law. And when we've knocked on the door of Big Law, they're not exactly excited to partner with us because they view it as a cannibalization of their services. But when a client mandates this partnership, it is fascinating what happens. And one of our clients, I believe, is writing a white paper about it and talking about how they have been able to create a blended rate to save the company substantial money while improving the quality of legal services, because typically certain pieces of a transaction might get pushed down to junior level associates. We handled it at the very top level and provided outcomes for our clients that were very favorable. So I want to share partnering with a NAMWOLF firm and your trusted existing big law firm might be a really good way to dip your toe and see how you like working with a NAMWOLF firm. I want to share that SRD is comprised of now, Joel, over 35 lawyers, thanks to you and the good work that you've done. We continue to grow, and we're really proud of our growth and want to share that our lawyers typically fall into one of three categories. Our lawyers are some very experienced and seasoned lawyers who have achieved the brass ring, served as chief legal officer of a large company or general counsel, or a partner of a firm, and they're at their senior arc of their career and have decided that they want to work on a more flexible basis and have more control over their lives. Our clients really value working with those lawyers who have so much experience. The second group of lawyers at our firm are women who are returning to the profession after raising a family or taking care of an aging parent. And I have found increasingly that this category of women has expanded to men, and that there are male lawyers who also want to have more control over their lives and work from their homes so that they can be a more part of their family's lives. And the last category of lawyers are military spouses. So we accidentally stumbled upon a piece of the talent pool that are military spouse lawyers. These are largely women married to active members of the military who require portable jobs, or they simply can't work. They get moved around every 18 to 24 months, and they can't work at a traditional firm because where they're getting relocated, they're not in areas where there are firms to employ them. We have found that the military spouse lawyers are very dedicated, very gritty, and we spend time training them, and we work together as a team. We really value the team approach, and we embed military spouse lawyers on many of our teams at SRD. With that, Stephanie, I would love to just turn to slide 6 in the presentation, which talks about, oh, maybe it's slide 7. I'm looking for the slide that says our work for, there it is, thank you. I want to just briefly highlight the types of work we do for global banks to give you a better sense of how we support some of your colleagues or competitors. And SRD will review engagement letters, consulting agreements. We handle the full gamut of reviewing, redlining, and negotiating with counterparties. We do a lot of NDA review and negotiation, and we completely can take that off the desk of an in-house legal department and serve as an extension of your in-house team. And a lot of our clients really appreciate that we can also be a pressure release valve. And whenever there is a change of staffing in-house, somebody's on a vacation, out on maternity leave, the work doesn't need to suffer. And we can jump in on an as-need basis or manage certain workflows on a fully outsourced basis. We also review large volumes of contract amendments to address regulatory requirements. We did this in connection with resolution and recovery planning, and Andy is expert on that. We also have programs where we review technology, software agreements, vendor service agreements, a whole litany of contracts that would flow through your in-house legal department. And we also manage prime services and derivative agreements and legal opinion review. And those are just some of the ways that we represent global banks. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Andy Hutcher, who can tell you more about Our work is a NAMWOLF firm, and I just want to thank Joel and Stephanie for allowing us to be part of this presentation. Andy, are you?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk a little bit more about SRD Legal Group and NAMWOLF. I'm only going to take a few more minutes because this has been a fantastic and also very thorough presentation on D&I related issues. I just am particularly thankful to IIB for giving us this opportunity. I just want to say from the start that I'm a proud white male advocate for D&I related issues, have been throughout my entire legal career, and I'm just, really pleased to be here, representing SRD Legal Group directly and indirectly NAMWOLF. Our goal for this part of the presentation was to take a conceptual topic, which Joel did so well, and make it as tangible as possible on what some next steps can be. And Suzie went through the kind of work we're actually doing with banks, both domestic and non-US based banks. I think you may have heard in the beginning, in terms of my legal career, I spent some years at a big law firm and many years, actually 27 years, in-house in a legal department at a very large non-US based bank, working through both head office issues as well as covering the different business lines around the firm. I think the work we're doing is something that is actionable. We'd be pleased to talk with you more about the kind of work we do. Hopefully you can take the slides away and focus on both this slide number 6 and also slide 7 that I think will apply to many banks, that covers the kind of work we do for asset management and alternative investment firms, because it will give you a way outside of litigation and some of the other areas we talked about, squarely in the corporate space, to work with a NAMWOLF firm. And then also to those of you in the audience who work at a large or medium-sized law firm, as Suzie and Joel mentioned earlier, there's just huge potential for us to work together and partner, lowercase p, partner, to work with our clients, in-house legal departments, and divide up the work in a way to make sure that it's delivered both at the highest level of quality, but also in a very efficient and cost-effective way. The work we do most of the work, at least at SRD Legal Group, is supported by playbooks and fallback positions that we work on with in-house legal counsel, so that literally we can take flows of work off the desks of in-house lawyers, know the flexibility that SRD Legal Group has to negotiate. Often we influence those playbooks because of our broad experience in the industry with what's market, and we think our clients are served well there, but also importantly work out escalation points so that when there is a novel issue or something outside of the agreed parameters, there's a way to address those issues efficiently, effectively, and most importantly, keep the ball moving on these corporate matters, which is key. We do this at the enterprise level and also at different business lines within some of our clients. So, as I said, we'd be pleased to answer any questions you have about our firm, NAMWOLF generally, and to talk to any of you on a one-on-one basis should you be interested in pursuing some opportunities with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joel, Andy, Suzie. We do have a few questions. The first one I'll take, which is, can we get the slides? This was a great presentation, and I'll let everyone know that we have both the slides and the Power of Partnership article, as well as a couple of other very helpful articles on our registration page. So feel free to go there and take a look. As for questions, we've received a number from the audience, and the first one is something that I, having been involved both as in organizing as well as participating in a lot of D&I training, you know, the question that people leave with is, okay, what do I do next? And you provided a lot of concrete, Joel provided a lot of concrete practical ways that law firms as well as in-house legal groups can move the needle on D&I. But the question is, you know, is that only something that can be done at a top-down level, or you know, what can sort of junior people in a department do to help move that needle?
No, great question. I can tell you, you know, historically, when I've given this presentation to corporate legal groups, oftentimes they will ask me back to then meet with either the leadership team in the corporation, or if they have a D&I committee, to meet with the committee and help them stand up their organization. So it really depends on two things. Let's take both assumptions. Number one, you do not have a diversity inclusion program at all. First of all, the junior attorney is my favorite because they're the high trajectory, they got the energy, the excitement, they can make things happen. I've seen that time and time again. So yes, top down is nice to have, but you, that 6-year, 8-year attorney, can really change the entire world. I've seen it happen. If you don't have a program in place, you know, I'd recommend introducing me with you to your leadership team to talk about the benefits of the program, introducing you to Bank of America or Morgan Stanley or other corporations that are more mature and advanced in their program, or taking that famous slide I gave you with the house with the pillars and taking it yourself and saying, we really need to set up a program and we think we should align by the 4 pillars. That has worked many, many times. If you have a program in place that isn't really achieving what you want, again, I would bring in the house and the things on the left, and I would go through kind of a diagnosis, right? You know, well, it's not working because we spend time on it twice a year, or when anything else takes priority, or it's not an imperative, or we're not using carrots and sticks. I would assess your program compared to that slide, which again is not just me, it's what I've gleaned from what other corporate legal groups are doing. Marry them up and see where you're deficient and make corrective changes. I've rarely ever, in this environment, again, we've caught a wave. Let's be candid. The silver lining from all the bad stuff that is happening is people are talking about D&I louder and more often than I've ever seen before. You have the opportunity, no matter where you are in your legal group, to take this back to your leadership and or D&I committee and say, we need to look at this differently and do more. I believe 99% certainty you're going to attain some levels of success. A year ago, I would have said you're at 60, 55%. So you have that wave right now, so let's do it. And I'm happy to help you.
That's helpful. Another question that came in that I just think reflects what you just said is this a moment or is this a movement? Do you think, you said ride the wave, is that wave going to continue long term?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I don't know, but I'm going to fight to make this not only a movement, but a constant. And I'm seeing things, you know, you never heard a white equity partner or a white CEO say Black Lives Matter. You just didn't hear it. You could ask people about the concept of privilege a year ago, and they would have no clue what it means. I'll give you another story, and I think it's good news. It's reflective of the fact that this may be more than just a time and point. It may be a movement. I am on a daily basis getting people calling me up and saying, I've been told by my CEO or told by my general counsel to find more minority women-owned law firms, and taking it back even a step further, I want more black lawyers, either black law firms or within minority women-owned law firms. So we are seeing things that we haven't seen. But until we see more African-American equity partners, until we see more minority women-owned law firms getting the opportunity to do business with you, until we see more equality in the profession, you know, people can argue either. This one smells and seems differently. I've been fighting for this for 25 years, and I have been smart enough to basically understand it is wave. I'm hoping this one's a concept, but I don't know. I'd be interested, Stephanie, what you think.
Well, I hope so too, and I also don't know. So I have another question. This one will be for Suzie and or Andy. You mentioned, Suzie, that the law firms were somewhat reluctant, maybe, I think you put it in different words, to partner with a smaller firm, a NAMWOLF firm or the like. I wonder, what does it take to get them to do it? Is it just clients pushing? Is that the only way? Or what are other ways to convince law firms that this is good for them too?
That's a really good question. And I'm not sure that I know the exact answer, but I will tell you that at this moment, these are client-driven solutions. I do not know of any other NAMWOLF firms who have been successful in knocking on the door of the big firm saying, let's go out and jointly market our services. And I think the reason, and I understand it, is the big law firms say, why do we need you? We can do this ourselves. I do think there's going to be a change. And I think that as clients mandate these partnerships and solutions, the large law firms that participate will see the benefit and will understand that they are able to offer something a little bit different, increase their work with diverse firms, and also offer their clients lower rates as a result. So I'm optimistic, but I think it takes time. Joel, did you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I want to tell you a great story. So you are right historically, but again, I've seen some changes. We are hearing both from corporations. A large energy company is demanding its large law firms to partner with us, so we're seeing that. But let me tell you a story. One of the top 3 law firms in the world is trying to get business in the insurance industry with a company, and they do it through reverse auctions, and they've never won. And this time they partnered with a NAMWOLF firm on the reverse auction, and they weren't the lowest price, but one of the criteria was diversity inclusion. They won their first business with this insurance company because they chose to partner with a NAMWOLF firm, and the insurance company took that as a positive. So that's just an example of the law firm using it. Law firms are getting hit appropriately so for not doing what they need to do with respect to diversity inclusion. They cannot abdicate their responsibility by saying we're not going to do anything but use minority women-owned law firms. But I can tell you as in-house and as other in-house telling me that when a law firm proposes partnering with a minority women-owned law firm in order to get this great solution, and there's an element of helping with supplier diversity, most corporations will weigh that favorably, and law firms are starting to see that more and more.
One last question. What is the greatest resistance to promoting diversity you find? Is it that people don't want to acknowledge implicit bias? Is it that is it more about competition? Is it fear that advancement in the legal profession is a zero-sum game?
Yeah, I mean, the person who asked the question arguably answered it. There's a lot of factors. I do believe unconscious bias is the #1 impediment because we fail to admit it. And if you fail to admit something, you can't change direction. I also think we're stubborn in changing. Ironically, again, we should be more flexible, but we are oftentimes, as legal professionals, less likely to want to change the way we do business, and it takes change. I think there's a lot of issues with respect to how do we do it, and part of this presentation was to create a foundation for how to do it and how to do it the right way. But if you had to have me answer one, I really think unconscious bias. I don't think people are aware that every single day their actions unconsciously are impeding progress. And I think if we can remove that as a barrier, we can really make some great changes.
And I guess as a follow-up to that, is it that you need everyone to take the Harvard test and make it mandatory at employers, or how do you do that?
Well, I do. When I ran legal groups, if I were running a legal group today, not only would I have everybody take the Harvard implicit bias test, but I would have each of my departments take it, have a third party score it, and I would have the group meet and discuss where our biases are as a labor and employment group or transactional group. That's the first step. I think the next step is getting the training. But again, if every corporate legal group created a program similar to what I suggested, which allows for a lot of malleability, I think that is the best step. I would suggest to you that probably 95% of the times I've given this presentation to a legal group that doesn't have a program in place, within 2 months they have a program that's standing up. Also, I'd be very happy to share with you sample mission and vision statements, sample questions that people are asking Big Law about D&I. Please use me as a resource, and this is my love, this is my passion, and it's more than just NAMWOLF, obviously, that I'm selling. I'm selling that we as a legal profession need to do more. But let me finish with one thought. If you look at this as a strategic imperative, how do you look at your other strategic imperatives? What do? You are process-driven. You create a document that says, here's what we want to accomplish. Here's who's responsible. Here's the accountability. Here's how we're going to reward the behavior. Here's how we're going to punish. We do not look at this as a strategic imperative. If you just look at it as any other program and manage it with program management rigor, you will have a much greater chance of being successful than we are today.
Great, thank you. So thank you again, Joel, Andy, Suzie. This was really great and very informative. For everyone, if anyone wants further information, again, we have it on our registration page, but also feel free to email me or Bridget, and we're happy to put you in touch with any one of our fantastic panelists.
Yeah, I want to say thank you too. Thanks for everybody that joined. Thank you, Suzie, Andy, and Joel. This was great, really helpful, and we look forward to working with you and learning more from you. So everyone, have a great day. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.